So I mostly resist comparing human languages to computer languages. It's only narrowly useful in the analogy, and at some point the confusion even led to students being able to fulfill a language requirement with programming classes. That just seems bizarre to me. I don't think it does anyone any good to confuse human communication with logical instructions. But that said, I do think one aspect of SQL, structured query language, might be useful for illustrating the communication pathways from thought to language to thought. So it always seemed intuitive to me that language had informational content, right? We encode meaning in words, and this meaning is a form of data. And I think the tendency is to think that the data in language is comparable to the data in a file. It contains information that could be decoded by the correct algorithm. The words carry the data. It's not really incorrect. I just think it's only partially correct. It works best when we take language as a definable structure. We can take apart and analyze with some objectivity. And when 10 people can look at a sentence and correctly derive the same data that was encoded in it, it seems like there must have been some data there. But I think that sort of ignores the functional architecture of communication using language. No word ever started out meaning anything. It means something because it's the sound someone made when they thought or felt something. It's an associated meaning. The meaning can only be correctly decoded by someone who already associates a comparable internal meaning with the same sound. All the data that language encodes originates as thought, and it's used to evoke the thought referenced by the sound. Language is a reference system for thought data. So if I say chair, I'm querying the neural classifiers you use to identify or construct an archetype for a chair in your mind. But even for nouns, it can be a wide open field. I can ask you to imagine a man sitting in a chair and walk you through a sequence of activities he does, and all the while I'm imagining a folding chair, and you might be imagining a comfy lazy boy. And for the majority of communication purposes, it just really doesn't matter. A chair is functionally a chair. But it illustrates how quickly our queries can diverge from our meaning even with a simple object reference. So human language conveys a large component of emotional and biological state information that requires neural classifiers for subjective human experience. Feeling hungry is a pretty deeply biologically associated word. For me to communicate an experience involving hunger, I have to rely on your pre-existing experiences and resulting classification of hunger to understand. So what if I wanted to say the same thing to a hypothetical incorporeal being who has never experienced hunger? I guess I could get into cellular activity and hormone production or whatever chemical process actually creates the state that I experience as hunger. I guess that even sort of brings us up to over to the Alice, the color scientist thing about, what constitutes qualia. But defining experience isn't really the point here. It's more about how language references experience, though I'm not sure I really have a complete point with this one. I just think there's value to thinking of words as thought queries. It's a lot more obvious in more mechanical or technical communications. Nobody's that surprised when someone doesn't know words referencing esoteric parts, skill sets, or processes associated with specialization unless they've been trained in and practiced that specialization. And skills and knowledge and the associated references for them are expected to develop gradually, with some skills and knowledge being necessary prerequisites for others. Music is an interesting example, though, because I think we actually do a better job of intuitively recognizing that it's a reference language, not a data carrier, especially in terms of cultural musical references. Film composers seem like they have a mastery of using common experiential musical associations that their audience are likely to have to evoke desired emotional states. Of course, some of them are so old they were actually the ones that created the associations in film, but they didn't create them from thin air. Musical styles have associations with entertainment, labor, religion, war, death, pretty much everything humans do. So if you want to reference a human emotional state with music, there's a pretty broad palette of deep associations to choose from. Even an amateur songwriter seems to have an intuition about using music as an emotional reference. Without even knowing the music theory, they may choose time signatures, key changes, chord progressions, or even a specific melody with the intent of referencing an emotional state in their audience, knowing full well it's a reference that depends on their audience to understand. I'm not sure if anyone would say that's what they were doing if you ask them. It just seems like they must know it at some level. And nobody would make the mistake of playing the Star Wars theme, playing the Star Wars theme and thinking it would mean anything without thinking of the experiential context of whoever was listening. Though we probably do a better job of recognizing the query features of language with obvious cultural topics in general. I've taken to asking pretty much everyone I meet if they're Always Sunny fans, so I'll know if my references will land. But those are trivial but obvious ones. We take a lot of our experiences of culture as universal that are definitely not, even within our own culture. So the SQL analogy is only useful to a point. Of course, there's no insert statement or anything like that. And it can be argued that there is data in language in some instances. A number is a pretty objective data symbol. But for a wide amount of human thought data, a single word or phrase reference may access a wide range of constructs, and we rely on each other having similar enough constructs to make the reference meaningful in that context. So thinking of language as working this way can remind us that nothing we say is definitive just because we said it the way we meant it, even to people we think we share a broad context with. We're kind of blind querying thoughts from other minds using table and field names we think they should have relevant data to, whatever. Unfortunately, that doesn't paint a very optimistic picture of human communication, since it relies on unknowable qualities of the listener as much as the quality of the communication. I used to have kind of a grand vision of a perfect message for humanity, that if you could just encode the right meaning in some universally accessible way, all humans could understand. But it just doesn't work that way. You can mostly only work with the thought data available in the minds you're communicating with. And that's not to say it's impossible to create new reference thought data in a human mind, but it's a more complex and individual learning and experience process, and I'm just talking about the talking. And so maybe I'm completely way off here. Maybe people already really think about language like this, and I'm just dumb because I really didn't think about it until I thought about it, and when I did, it was kind of different than I thought it was before I really thought about it. But I feel compelled to mention a quote I attribute to my grandfather here. I'm not sure if it was him quoting someone else, but I attribute to him. Anyway, someone said, "The greatest obstacle to communication is the illusion that it has already been achieved." And if there is a point to this post, I think that's the gist of it. Unfortunately, I don't really know how to reliably see through that illusion. Seems like the illusion is really all there is to communication, and it just sometimes happens to correspond with reality just enough to work.